Welcome to the Virtual Insight series here at Solent University. My name is Dr. Sarah Hillier. I'm a registered nutritionist and I'm part of the Solent Nutrition team here at Solent. I'm joined by my colleague today.
Hi, I'm Cara Roberts. I'm a registered dietitian as well as a registered nutritionist and part of the team that help run applied human nutrition here at Solent as well.
Perfect. So we're going to be talking to you guys today about debunking plant-based diets. First of all, we'd really like to sort of welcome you guys to connect with us here at Solent Nutrition. We have a variety of social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, website. By all means, give us a follow, give us a like. We've got some really fantastic recipes and up-to-date information about all things nutrition on our social media pages. So do feel free to give us a like or a follow. So today's overview of the lecture, we'll be discussing the link between nutrition and health. We're specifically going to be looking at what we call plant-based diets, and we're going to be talking about all the different types and definitions that you may have come across. We're going to be really focusing on the benefits of following a plant-based diet from both a health perspective, but also from the environment as well. And of course, we're going to be giving you guys some top tips if you're considering actually following a plant-based diet. What are the key things that we think you should be looking out for, and some top tips from the team itself. If you're interested and want to know more about the Virtual Insight series, you're welcome to click on the website and the link in the slides. So first off, we thought we'd start with what is the link between diet and health? Well, the science that examines the relationship between diet and health really is what we'll be focusing on today. And we know that everybody needs foods to live. So we all eat and we all drink, but what sort of the types of food that we have and how much we have can really affect our health. So for example, if we eat too much or too few of particular types of foods, or perhaps even the wrong types, we know that it can have significant health outcomes. So with the increased rise of overweight and obesity, with individuals developing things like type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, we know that nutrition has a link with osteoporosis, some cancers, and dental health. So what we eat really does start having an effect on our health. So what do we mean by plant-based diets, and why are we so interested in them here in nutrition? So the British Dietetic Association has a definition for plant-based diets, and it's based on foods derived from plants, including vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and fruits, with few or no animal products within somebody's diet. Now, you may have heard of the term plant-based diet before, but there's also some other terms that you might be used to as well. And we wanted to show you what the difference was between all of those different definitions. So, for example, if you classify yourself as a vegan, it means that you avoid all animal products within the diet. A lacto-vegetarian would avoid meat, fish, and eggs, but would eat some dairy foods. If you consider yourself a lacto-vegetarian, this means that you avoid meat and fish, but you do eat dairy foods and eggs. We have a pesco-vegetarian, and this is where somebody avoids eating meat, but you do consume fish, shellfish, dairy foods, or eggs within your diet. And the last one that we wanted to touch on was what we call a flexitarian diet, and this is where you eat a small amount of animal products. And it's very important that we understand what the difference is between all of those different terms. Now, when it comes to plant-based foods or plant-based diets, generally it's considered that at least 2/3 of the diet is you consume plant-based foods, and less than 1/3 of it comes from what we call animal-based products. So this could include fish, meat, dairy, and eggs. So why are we so interested in plant-based diets, and what's the evidence behind their sort of global rise? Well, when you look at the information and the data, plant-based, or the term plant-based, was the #1 food trend in 2018. But interestingly, the word veganism is actually one of the top consumer trends for the last 3 years. And we know that the rise in what we call plant-based, or at least veganism as well, has become really popular because of the celebrity endorsements. So individuals such as Lewis Hamilton, Venus Williams, Ariana Grande, Natalie Portman, Bill Clinton, Brad Pitt, to name a few celebrities, now really endorse plant-based diets. And we also know when we look at our social media outputs that actually the term plant-based diets is particularly popular when it comes to social media platforms such as Instagram. When you use the hashtag vegan, it's been used 103.3 million times in posts over Instagram. Vegetarian, 29.2, and plant-based, 31.5. So it just shows that there's a massive increase in sort of the global popularity of plant-based diets and diets that encompassed or eating less meat and fish. And in the UK, we know that the rise of individuals classifying themselves specifically as vegan has risen by nearly 350% over the last couple of years. So what are the benefits, or what are the health benefits of following a plant-based diet? We know that plant-based diets really often report limiting saturated fat intake, and we know that saturated fat is linked to cardiovascular disease. And we also know that it's one of the ways in which we increase our fiber intake. And we know that that's particularly useful for some of the cancers, particularly the small and the large intestine as well. The benefits of sort of eating a lot of these sort of whole grains, nuts, fruits, veggies, beans, pulses, and lentils really just has an impact not only on your own health, but also the environment itself. And we know that when we look at the sort of carbon dioxide output for different sort of diet categories, we can see that if individuals that follow fish, vegetarian or vegan diets predominantly have a much lower carbon footprint than our high meat eaters or medium meat eaters. So if the world sort of switched to a completely vegan diet, we know that we would reduce the land use for agricultural farming by 76%, and we'd also reduce greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 49%, according to the latest evidence. So the benefits of consuming plant-based diets not only are positive for our own health, but also have a significant impact on the environment as well. When we look further into this greenhouse gas emission, we can really see that there's variety across the food chain and so food supply. So for example, the areas down the bottom have the lowest carbon emission, are predominantly plant-based products, and are about 10 to 50 times lower in carbon emissions to create those products than their animal-based counterparts. So for example, the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases is from our meat production in predominantly beef, lamb, and we also know that there's significant carbon dioxide output from our cheese manufacturing. So animal farming inherently is very wasteful in terms of its converting energy from the animal through the different elements of the food chain. And we also know that farming billions of animals each year produces a huge amounts of waste, but also requires a significant amount of water and land use in order for these to be manufactured at the rate that we require them. So going plant-based would really start to negate a large contribution of many of the sort of animal-based products that we are very predominantly trying to want to consume within our diet. And actually by going plant-based, we can really reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So there are some things that we really want you guys to consider if you're thinking about following a plant-based diet. So the nutritional requirements for each individual will vary depending on if a person has a chronic disease, and that's really important to mention. And of course, the nutritional status of anybody that's at risk, okay, when you remove a food group is really important to consider. So if you're thinking about following a plant-based diet, there is some really careful planning to do. And there are some vitamins and minerals and some food groups that we'd really like you to consider before moving completely to a plant-based diet. And my colleague Cara will be going through each one of these individually.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So first and foremost, a common question that we get as dietitians and registered nutritionists is, can I get enough protein on a plant-based diet? And we certainly know that yes, the simple answer is yes, you can. You just need to be aware of where they're coming from. So this side, obviously, we've put together with some of the foods that are rich in protein. And basically the protein in your diet is made up of building blocks called amino acids. And essentially we have 8 amino acids that we can't actually basically produce in our body, so we need to consume through the diet. And animal proteins generally can contain all of these amino acids, so they're called often what's called a complete protein. But some of your protein sources in a plant-based diet are not complete. And it used to be thought that we had to worry about kind of therefore complementing different foods, but that's being dispelled now. And we know that actually as long as you're eating a variety of the kinds of foods you can see on this slide, and we'll go through them in a moment, that actually you can get all those essential amino acids within your diet. And generally as a whole, as a UK population, we actually overconsume on protein anyway. So it's very rare that actually we see people not getting enough protein on vegetarian and vegan diets. So a good, some good sources of protein in the diet, well, you can look at legumes. So that kind of covers things like beans and lentils and nuts. Starchy foods. So again, we tend to think protein has to come from meat, but actually we do get a certain amount from our whole grains. And actually good sources of things like quinoa. Again, they've actually got all your essential amino acids. Again, nuts and seeds are brilliant. And then you've got some meat alternatives. So we know that soy products are particularly good. You can use corn, keeping in mind that if you want to follow a vegan diet, not all corn products are entirely vegan. So just being careful that you don't consume them by mistake. So another micronutrient that we have in the diet that's important to keep in mind in following a plant-based diet is iron. So iron we use for the development of our red blood cells, and they help carry oxygen around the body. And good sources, again, we tend to get a lot of iron from our meat products, and that's why when we move to vegan or vegetarian diets, we just need to be aware of actually still making sure that we're having some iron containing vegetarian foods within our diet. So good options, again, coming back to pulses, you'll probably get sick of hearing about pulses in this slide series, but again, our lentils, chickpeas, beans, but also again, things like tofu, so those soy-based products are very good. Nuts and seeds, again, quinoa, but also dried fruits as well. So things like raisins, apricots, figs, and you can get a lot of now fortified both cereals and bread. So this is where kind of checking the labels and starting to become a bit more savvy about those kind of fortified foods in your diet becomes really useful. Another really handy tip is actually in terms of how our body uses iron once we've eaten it. Vitamin C in the diet, so consuming something containing vitamins or a food containing vitamin C alongside an iron containing food can help increase the amount you can actually absorb from the foods you eat. So it's really nice to think about if you're consuming, say, your lentils, maybe trying to have some kind of a vitamin C source within that meal at the same time. So classically we think vitamin C, we think of our citrus fruits, but actually it's in a lot of other foods as well. So things like your peppers, broccoli, cabbage can all nicely complement the iron in your diet. And then obviously if we're having something like breakfast cereals that are fortified, then again, trying to have maybe some oranges, berries, or some other vitamin C containing fruits with it. Another source within the diet that we need to be mindful of in terms of micronutrients is calcium. So everyone kind of knows calcium as being important in helping with the healthy sort of development of our bones and teeth. And ideally we should be aiming for 2 calcium rich servings per day of within our vegetarian diets. So in terms of consuming plant-based milks, then actually if we take on 400 mils of that, then that can be a really good source. But a careful reminder there as well is when you're consuming plant-based milks, they are usually fortified with things like calcium, vitamin D, but not all are. And typically the ones that tend to miss out or not be fortified are your organic varieties. So again, this is where becoming a bit label savvy will help you just ensure that you are selecting the right ones for you. So generally we think, you know, in meat eating or diets that we rely on dairy foods. So it's often thought, well, let's just kind of replace dairy foods with your non-dairy alternatives, and that is fine. So you can use your nut milks or your tofus, but you do get calcium in other forms in the diet as well. So we can get it through green leafy vegetables, particularly kale, and things like pak choi. We can get it again in fortified breads, and also again dried fruits are surprisingly a good source as well, and nuts. Another important nutrient to consider is something called omega-3 fats. So these are essential fatty acids. Again, coming back to the term essential, because we can't produce them in our body, so we need to consume them through the diet. And there's two main types that we're concerned of when it comes to thinking about health effects. We have longer versions called shorthand DHA and EPA. I won't confuse you with the confusing names that they stand for, but and they're generally found in oily fish, and this is why we tend to see those recommendations around 2 portions of fish per week, one of which is oily, and that's centered around understanding the beneficial role that omega-3 fats can play in the body. We can also get shorter versions from vegetarian sources, and they're typically coming from vegetable oils. But actually the conversion rate of these shorter versions are not as good in terms of the uptake we get from consuming oily fish. So good plant-based sources to include if we're trying to make sure that we're including omega-3 fats in the diet. Ground linseeds are very good, and again they can be quite versatile in how you can use them, adding them to your food. Chia seeds, so this is why you do hear things like chia seeds and kind of quinoa as being kind of superfoods. Again, no food is a superfood, but actually they are useful in terms of providing nutrients in a vegetarian or vegan diet that we wouldn't otherwise have good intakes of. Shelled hemp seeds and walnuts are particularly good as well. And then also thinking about the oils we choose. So your generic kind of vegetable oil is usually rapeseed oil, or you can now buy it as a standalone kind of compressed version of rapeseed oil as well. So these are good vegetable oils to choose in your sort of cooking and dressings. Another key one we should mention, and again this will depend on whether you're following a vegetarian or a vegan diet in terms of how difficult it may be to get vitamin B12 in your diet. But we use vitamin B12 similar to iron to help produce red blood cells. It's also used in energy production, helps keep our nervous systems healthy. So it's a really important nutrient. And again, unfortunately, naturally, it only really occurs in our meat-containing foods, so whether that be meat itself or dairy products. So if you're vegetarian and you're still eating things like eggs and dairy, then generally actually most vegetarians can meet their vitamin B12 needs quite easily. However, obviously, if you're following more of a vegan diet, the options become somewhat restricted. So we're back to thinking about fortified breakfast cereals again, so where it's artificially added, might be in things like yeast extracts or soya milks, or certain kind of other types of nut milk alternatives as well, again, where that's being fortified in. So always worth keeping in mind that if you're vegan and kind of struggling to regularly keep fortified versions of foods in your diet, to just be mindful that of course supplements can be an option, and again you'd want to consult either your GP or registered nutritionist or dietitian about that. And then the good old vitamin D, I think this is the last vitamin we talk about. So this is known as our sunshine vitamin. We absorb it, we get most of our vitamin D actually through sunlight exposure in the summer. And again, vitamin D is kind of well known to work alongside calcium to help with the absorption of calcium and phosphorus and keeping our bones healthy. Interestingly, there's lots more research around other benefits of vitamin D coming out around kind of immune function and mental health. So a really, really key vitamin that we want to make sure we're not deficient in. So again, it's about sunlight exposure. So it's not that actually we should automatically be deficient of it with a vegetarian or vegan diet. And actually now the rule is, well, not the rule, but the recommendation is that actually we should all be taking a vitamin D supplement over the winter months, because we can store, this is a fat soluble vitamin, we can store amounts of it, but we know that over the winter actually we don't get enough ultraviolet radiation to actually be taking on board any more vitamin D. So we can become deficient over those winter months. And we know that there are particular people or population groups, sorry, that will be more at risk of developing vitamin D deficiency. And they're actually therefore recommended to take supplements daily. So this could include children under 5, pregnant women and breastfeeding women, and also those over 65. And quite often this is because they don't get much exposure to the sunlight. Just a really important point to note, well, first of all, that there are some food sources of vitamin D, but it's not that we would be able to meet our requirements in total by having vitamin D in the diet. But if you did want to sort of be aware of where we can get some, again, it's generally in fortified foods, so it's within kind of fat spreads, eggs, breakfast cereals, and some soya drinks as well. And just a really useful tip we've added down the bottom there is, again, when choosing vitamin D supplements, this is where label reading comes in again, just be sure to read that label and ensure that they are suitable for you if you're following a vegan diet. So vitamin D2 and D3, they are vegan friendly options quite often, but again, just always worth double checking the label to be sure. So I'm going to finish off my little bit with some just top tips on trying to follow a plant-based diet. Well, I don't want to say try because that makes it sound like it should be hard. It's not. But some top tips on how to follow it and follow it well and confidently. So just the first one is mindful that sometimes people always just assume, well, if I follow a certain diet, I'm therefore healthier. And you can actually still make some unhealthy choices on a vegan or vegetarian diet. So you can still eat crisps. You still might be able to eat some chocolate if you're just following a vegetarian diet. So just being mindful that actually when we're talking about this being beneficial for health, we're not just saying it can actually be beneficial no matter what you're eating. And it does still require you to put some thought into, am I having those, sources of protein that are beans and lentils and low saturated fat options, or am I choosing a lot of prepackaged processed sort of snack bars and burgers, for example? And that leads me on to my second point is, again, the kind of temptation is there, and we all have it in our day-to-day lives. We're busy, so it's easy to kind of buy pre-made stuff. But essentially, some of the supermarket options, so vegan burgers or sausages or pies, they will quite often still contain high levels of saturated fat and salt and sugar. So generally, homemade is always best if you can. And check those labels and just, if you want to buy, by all means, pre-made, you can, but making it from home means you have some control over the levels of sort of fat and salt and sugar going into those foods. A general rule of thumb is to always try and include some kind of protein at each meal. So remember, that doesn't always have to be beans and lentils and nuts. It can be things like soya as well. So thinking of like your soya milks with your breakfast cereals, it can be eggs on toast, or again looking at tofu or beans and lentils. So yeah, get experimenting, but do try and generally take a bit of a view back and think, am I trying to include some form of protein at each meal? We talked earlier about omega-3, and again, trying to be mindful of including that regularly in the diet can be difficult, but a really easy win can just be using milled flaxseed or linseed, and that comes as almost like a powder, so it can just be sprinkled on smoothies or yogurt, again dairy-free alternatives. It can go in smoothies, soups even, and again, even in the summer, sprinkle some seeds on with a little bit of that over a salad or something. Can be a really easy way just to include a bit of omega-3 daily. We covered this one earlier, but just to reiterate, again, if you're buying non-dairy milk, don't forget that some of your organic varieties may not contain the kind of fortified vitamins and minerals. So again, just become quite food label savvy, try and make homemade when you can, and try and build in, a fun day each week where, keep in mind, you don't have to, go complete cold turkey, as they say, and go straight from meat eating to vegan or vegetarian. Just try maybe even at the start, just having one day a week where you kind of experiment with a new recipe that's either vegetarian or vegan friendly. Back over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Cara. So we just thought we'd add a few additional pieces of advice to remember that actually we eat foods and not nutrients. And I always say this, Cara, and I always say this to our students, that we talked specifically about micronutrients and macronutrients and protein and vitamins and things, but actually we eat whole foods. And it's very important that we consider that when we're thinking about our plant-based diets, and that we think about the foods that we consume. We have foods, and it's very sociable. We're a very sociable sort of nation in terms of how we consume foods. It's very important that we think about those and not just those individual nutrients, although they're important to consider. We also want to remind everybody and sort of encourage everybody to enjoy their food and to have balance. And Cara mentioned some of the pitfalls when it comes to sort of more shop-based pre-packaged food. And again, we don't want to say don't have them. We just are wanting to highlight that often they do have high salt, sugar, and saturated fats, which we know can have some negative health outcomes. So very important to have balance when it comes to considering our plant-based alternatives. Of course, one of the ways in which we suggest sort of starting small, if you are considering dabbling in the plant-based world, then things like meat-free Mondays are very important, very sort of popular way in which we can start to introduce sort of plant-based foods into our diets. Making sure you reach for those 5 fruit and vegetables a day, and of course more if you can. And we recommend things like swapping to high fiber foods, things like brown rice and pasta rather than our white rice and pasta counterparts. Of course, if you have any concerns, or if you have chronic diseases or anything that you're unsure about, we recommend obviously consulting your GP or a registered nutritionist or a registered dietitian for advice. There are lots of people out there that are able to help you navigate the world of plant-based diets. So just a reminder, feel free to connect with us at Solent Nutrition. We're on our social media platforms. We have some fantastic recipes that both the staff and the student have been displaying, particularly on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So by all means, check those out. And we'd love to hear from you guys what other plant-based sort of diets and foods and recipes you guys have been consuming. Finally, just a bit of a plug for our next virtual insight session here at Solent. We're going to be looking at food sustainability, so a little bit of piggybacking off what we talked about today about the effect of our food system on our greenhouse gas emission. And our title is, of course, Could Our Friday Night Steak Be Ruining the World? So do feel free to join us. We're going to be doing a live session on Monday, the 30th of November at 12 noon. We look forward to seeing you then, and thank you so much for listening.